before, this idea proposed by some of these objectors here that somehow we need a commission to study this election and to get into the idea of how, as the president believes, it was stolen and what really happened. Romney trying to cut through all the noise there and say the best way to honor the opinions of the people who are mad is to tell them the truth and to be leaders. And I'm struck by both the emotion and Romney's voice at the very start of that, talking about his 25 grandchildren and that they were calling to make sure that he was okay here today doing his job, but also the fact that this is the second time in a year that Romney has really spoken out strongly against his own party and the president of it. Remember, he was the only Republican vote for the removal of President Trump in the impeachment, which was only a year ago, although it feels like 7 lifetimes ago. But this is now twice that he's sort of tried to capture this moment of conscience in the Republican Party to say this is not acceptable and we need to tell people the truth. A very powerful speech. And you heard it in the applause from members on the floor there.
All right, Garrett, thanks very much. I want to go to Kristen Welker right now at the White House. Kristen, we understand there is potential more fallout happening within the president's staff.
It has begun to happen, Lester, in the form of resignations. Of course, just a short while ago, we reported that the First Lady's Chief of Staff, Stephanie Grisham, announced her resignation, and now there have been more. One of the president's top advisors, Sarah Matthews, announcing her resignation, as well as the social secretary. And there's a lot of discussion and buzz about the idea that there may be more high-level resignations to follow. We are told, according to multiple sources, that among those considering resigning is the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, his deputy, Matt Pottinger, as well as the Transportation Secretary, Elaine Chao. That would be quite significant. Now, we have reached out for official comments. So far, have not gotten a response. But I do think it underscores the sense here at the White House and the mounting sort of divide that we are starting to see. Officials who are frankly quite angered by what they witnessed today and the fact that President Trump released 2 tweets and a statement on Twitter, a short video statement responding to those who stormed the Capitol. And it was really mixed messaging. The president again reiterating those false claims of widespread voter fraud and calling for peace, but not doing it defiantly enough, not doing it clearly enough. And so this is an administration right now, Lester, that is frankly sharply divided. I can tell you that the lights are off. I was just told that the president right now is in the residence. We know that he was watching these developments unfold throughout the day. There's only one White House official here inside the White House fielding a number of press inquiries, but the lights are out here. And so it really is a metaphor, I think, for what we are starting to see, which is Donald Trump becoming increasingly isolated as he refuses to accept the reality of this situation, which is what Mitt Romney just said, that he has lost this election. There has been mounting pressure on him for days now among some of his closest allies inside and outside of the West Wing to try to get him to acknowledge that, to try to get him to think of next steps. What will his off-ramp look like? What will his exit be? And yet he remains defiant tonight.
Yeah, he said there would be no concession. I made that very clear in his remarks before the rioting broke out. We should also note, notable that Elaine Chao, one of the names that Kristen mentioned as people pondering their future, she, of course, is the wife of Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
That's right. Let's go to political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. And Chuck, as we watch what's unfolding, how do you see this playing out? Do we have a better picture of how things will unfold this evening?
I think this evening we do. I mean, it looks like they're going to get this. They're moving in a direction. I do think that we're going to have a little bit of a lag here because of how the House is voting during the pandemic, and that it takes a long time for the voting itself to begin when they officially reject the Arizona challenge. So in that sense, I think it is, we're making some progress, but I do want to have some people need to urge a little bit of patience because they have to vote in groups in the House. So when they actually start voting, that's going to be a bit time consuming. But this, I think the real question is, and the real unknown is, what are they going to do about the president tomorrow? And you know, this is something that there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of everything, but there's clearly a demand for some accountability in some form or another. And what are they going to do? And I think that you can see there's a lot of folks realizing they need to do something. Resignation is a way to try to protect your own reputation, but there needs to be something done, obviously. I think you certainly see that there needs to be something else done, and I think there's a lot of grasping to figure out what that is, per se.
As we continue to watch the debate play out right now, this is the House of Representatives. Why don't we dip in?
This hallowed temple of democracy is where generations of Americans have peacefully come together to face our nation's greatest challenges, bridge our deepest fissures, and create a more perfect system of government. This is the appropriate place we stand to respectfully and peacefully give voice to the people we represent across our diverse country. The representatives of the American people in this House are standing up for three fundamental American beliefs. The right to vote is sacred, that a representative has a duty to represent his or her constituents, and that the rule of law is a hallmark of our nation. And in the spirit of healing, those are not my words, those are the words of you, Madam Speaker, from this very chamber, when some of my colleagues and friends across the aisle objected to the 2005 Electoral College certification. In fact, there were objections on this floor to the certification of nearly every Republican president in my lifetime. In 1989, in 2001, in 2005, and in 2017. So history is our guide that the people's sacred house is the appropriate venue for a peaceful debate. And this peaceful debate serves as a powerful condemnation to the violence that perpetrated our Capitol grounds today, the violence that was truly un-American. Today's discussion is about the Constitution, and it is about the American people, but it must also be about clearly and resolutely condemning the violence that occurred today. I am honored each and every day to represent New York's 21st Congressional District, and I believe it is my solemn and sacred duty to serve as their voice and their vote in the People's House. Tens of millions of Americans are concerned that the 2020 election featured unconstitutional overreach by unelected state officials and judges ignoring state election laws. We can and we should peacefully and respectfully discuss these concerns. In Pennsylvania, the state Supreme Court and Secretary of State unilaterally and unconstitutionally rewrote election law, eliminating signature matching requirements. In Georgia, there was constitutional overreach when the Secretary of State unilaterally and unconstitutionally gutted signature matching for absentee ballots and, in essence, eliminated voter verification required by state election law. In Wisconsin, officials issued illegal rules to circumvent a state law passed by the legislature as the Constitution requires, that required absentee voters to provide photo identification before obtaining a ballot. And in Michigan, signed affidavits document numerous unconstitutional irregularities. Officials physically blocking the legal right of poll watchers to observe vote counts, the illegal counting of late ballots, and hand stamping ballots with the previous day's date. My North Country constituents and the American people cherish the Constitution, and they know, according to the Constitution, elected officials closest to the people in state legislatures.
Representative Elise Stefanik of New York arguing against the count of the electoral vote as we continue to watch this ping-ponging on both sides of the Capitol. We want to turn now to this issue of social media, which a lot of new questions tonight based on what we saw at the Capitol.
Yeah, I mean, if there weren't enough extraordinary developments today, one of them is that Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook have now locked out the president of their social media accounts based on information that violated their policies. But let's get to Jolene Kent, who covers tech and Silicon Valley for us, for more on the thinking behind the decision and what exactly it amounts to.
Savannah, these major tech companies, some of the most powerful companies in the world, are under tremendous pressure tonight to do even more than just suspend the president temporarily. So far, what we know, Facebook and Instagram have locked his accounts for 24 hours. That means he won't be allowed to post within that period of time. Twitter also instituting lock and, interestingly, warning of a permanent suspension if he continues to violate the rules at Twitter. And so they're taking action faster and more aggressively than they ever have before. But this comes as a lot of critics are saying, look, you have done too little, too late, because so much of this violence, this right-wing extremism, disinformation has been allowed to grow and blossom on social media for years now, with piecemeal policies that have been put into place, but the president has been allowed to act more freely because of his position, his authority, and his position of power. What's really interesting is we just got confirmation of Mark Zuckerberg's internal email to Facebook employees, and he has been long under fire for saying that, you know, this is a free speech issue for the president and for politics in general, while not so much allowing that inside his company. But he did tell employees today in a memo, he's calling this a dark moment in our nation's history, calling it mob violence, not just protests. And Zuckerberg says he is treating this situation as an emergency and that Facebook is implementing additional measures to keep people safe. Now, this is coming as there are ongoing calls for these social media companies to do more. But so far, Twitter really out front, putting it plainly, saying if the president continues to violate their terms of service, their policies against hate and violence, they are actively considering permanently suspending him. And of course, as we all know, Twitter is the president's seemingly his favorite megaphone for getting his message out there. And these tools will not be available to him. But certainly a lot of chatter going on within these tech companies as well. Our NBC News business and tech team also reporting that inside these big social media companies, there's more and more pressure on the leadership to take more aggressive action, to do more, to prevent more of these calls to violence from the most powerful seat in the world from coming to light on these platforms, influencing so many people. But so far, those are the actions that have been taken by these ultra-powerful tech companies, guys.
All right, Joe, thank you very much. Let's go to Hallie Jackson at the White House as we continue to watch what happens in the Senate and see how this is going to unfold. What are you hearing, Hallie?
Yeah, listen, Savannah, I think that from the White House perspective, there are, the more people that we're talking to tonight and that I'm having conversations with tonight, the more you are getting a sense of people that are extremely troubled by what they've seen from President Trump. That is evidenced not just by the resignations, Savannah, that I know we have ticked through here tonight from, for example, the social secretary, from others, but the discussion of some resignations by some very high level officials, including based on sources that I've talked to, the National Security Advisor, perhaps the Transportation Secretary. We've reached out, obviously, for more official comment, but there are text messages, phone calls flying across the Capitol, across the White House, and across Washington right now. As we look now at what's happening on the Senate floor, on the House of Representatives floor,
all the ideas that you've been suggesting.
Worth noting and underscoring what Gary Hake was talking about a moment ago, Josh Hawley not backing down. There was some consideration. Earlier in the evening, I had been in touch with sources over on Capitol Hill whose hope, frankly, would be that senators would do like what we saw from, for example, Senator Kelly Loeffler, and back down, basically back away from this objection situation because of the message that they feel that it sends. That is not going to be the case here, as Senator Hawley made clear in these remarks. You have to think that the president is watching this. He is somebody who is very attuned to coverage of what is happening. His vice president, who he is presumably furious with, considering President Trump had for days tried to lean on Vice President Pence to stop any of this from happening. Of course, the vice president has no authority to do so. As we know, the president is oftentimes affected by the coverage that he sees and the way that is unfolding. And right now, it is just, I think, some serious alarm bells going off in the halls of the White House, Savannah.
You mentioned Hawley pressing on with his objections. They're still talking about just Arizona right now. Do we expect him to hold that position with the other states?
You know, potentially, Lester. There was some discussion about, for example, and this has been out there and reported about possibly Pennsylvania, for example, where else you might see that. But yeah, you're right. They are still focusing on Arizona at this point. You still have multiple states to go here.
All right, Hallie, thanks.
It sounds like we might have just
lost
Hallie there. Let's go to the Senate floor. Senator Angus King, who is independent but caucuses with the Democrats. Let's listen.
The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. President. The mob violence and attack we saw on our Capitol today should be a wake-up call to each and every one of us of what happens when we fail to come together, not as Democrats and Republicans, but each of us as Americans, to stand up to a president who time and again has shown contempt for our democracy, contempt for our Constitution. Today here on the Capitol, we witnessed people taking down an American flag and putting up a Trump flag. That is not democracy in the United States of America. As every senator who has spoken has mentioned, we have for hundreds of years had a peaceful transfer of power. Nobody likes to lose, and supporters of the losing candidate are always disappointed. What's different this time? We all know what's different this time. We had a president who, as the senator from New Jersey said, even before a vote was cast, that if he didn't win the election, it was going to be a fraud. And every day since then has perpetrated that lie. We have a president who just today criticized very loyal vice president who is presiding right now, urging him to disregard his responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States in order to reinstall Donald Trump as president. The same person who got on the phone to the Secretary of State in Georgia and threatened him to change the results of the election. Mr. President, I read something this week I'd never thought I'd read in a newspaper in the United States of America. It was an op-ed by all the living former secretaries of defense, including Secretaries Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Mattis, warning the country about our tradition of peaceful transfer of power, and that would be inappropriate for the military to take sides.
To some of the
in the
debate
United
that's going
States of
on
America.
in the United States Senate that's been going for almost 2 hours now. So we'll be watching to see whether the Senate moves on with this debate and this process. While that goes on, though, let's check in with Garrett Haake on Capitol Hill, our correspondent there, because there's a big question mark about Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, who was the first Republican to come out and say that he would object to the certification of the electoral votes. Almost a dozen Republican senators then followed suit. So in many ways, he's the architect of this day. We were trying to read the tea leaves of the statement he made, whether or not he was going to stick to those objections or whether he was going to decide to stand down. We're hearing conflicting things now, so could you explain where does that stand and what does that mean for the larger question of what will happen?
I could try. Apparently, Hawley's statements were confusing enough that his official spokesperson felt the need to clarify what he's going to do. Hawley had originally said that his objection was be focused on Pennsylvania. Apparently, according to Hawley's spokesperson, he will still object to Pennsylvania's electoral count when that moment comes later on tonight. The spokesperson says he'll yield his time, though. So what that means is Hawley will make his objection known on paper, but he won't stand up again to defend it or say anything more. His objection, if it's joined by a House members, and we can, I think, safely presume it will, means we'll get triggered into another one of these up to 2 hours of debate sometime later on tonight. So we're going to have at least one more debating session like this one tonight on the issue of Pennsylvania. Whether it goes the full 2 hours is an open question. What's not an open question is, once again, this will not change the results of any state, Pennsylvania or otherwise. It's just going to drag this on a little bit further tonight. Hawley perhaps feeling like he had put his name on paper earlier in the week saying he would object to Pennsylvania, and he still feels like he's got to do that.
And Garrett, how many states in total could we see challenged?
There was discussion during the course of the week up to 6, the sort of 6 battleground states that we've talked the most about: Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Those were the 6 that I think we were most focused on early in the week. Pennsylvania was the one that Republicans felt like they had the strongest case on, that they could make the best argument about if they were so inclined. Whether they do all 6 now, I think, is an open question.
So just so I can try to understand it, if in the Senate side Hawley objects but then yields his time, does that presumably end the debate on the Senate side, but the 2 hours could unfold on the House side? Or would the 2 hours go forward on the Senate side too?
Up to 2 hours would still go forward. Hawley can only yield his 5 minutes.
Okay.
So he can object, and if again, if a House and Senate member both object, it forces this 2 hour clock. He can only yield his 5 minutes. So he's essentially saying, I object to this, but I'm not going to bother to tell you anything about why. Here's some other senators who may debate this.
All right, let's go back to the Senate floor. Lindsey Graham now is making his remarks.
In Louisiana, do it. To hold the country hostage to end Reconstruction. It worked. The commission was 8-7. It didn't work. Nobody accepted it. The way it ended is when Hayes did a deal with these 3 states. You give me the electors, I'll kick the Union Army out. The rest is history. It led to Jim Crow. If you're looking for historical guidance, this is not the one to pick. If you're looking for a way to convince people there was no fraud, having a commission chosen by Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, and John Roberts is not going to get you to where you want to go. It ain't going to work. So it's not going to do any good. It's going to delay, and it gives credibility to a dark chapter of our history. That's why I'm not with you. But I will fight to my death for you. You're able to object. You're not doing anything wrong. Other people have objected. I just think it's a uniquely bad idea to delay this election. Trump and I, we've had a hell of a journey. I hate it to end this way. Oh my God, I hate it. From my point of view, he's been a consequential president. But today, first thing you'll see. All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough. I've tried to be helpful. But when the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled 4-3 that they didn't violate the Constitution of Wisconsin, I agree with the 3, but I accept the 4. If Al Gore can accept 5-4, he's not president. I can accept Wisconsin 4-3. Pennsylvania, it went to the Second Circuit. So much for all the judges being in Trump's pocket. They said, no, you're wrong. I accept the Pennsylvania Second Circuit that Trump's lawsuit wasn't right. Georgia, they said the Secretary of State took the law in his own hands. He changed the election laws unlawfully. A federal judge said no. I accept the federal judge even though I don't agree with it.